and I'm excited to be inviting him back this evening to talk with me. He will be on in a little bit. We'll have him on shortly. And in the meantime, I would just like to acknowledge a prayer and rest in peace to Nelson Mandela. We've just heard that he's passed away recently. Today it was on the news. And one of the things that really struck me with that was that in South Africa, they don't believe in the word death. They call death transition. So transition is the word that they use when someone dies. And the transition, it's just so appropriate considering where we are right now, in our lives, personally, collectively, as a species on the planet. Transition really speaks to all of the hardships and challenges and the wonderful epiphanies that we, experience, the whole spectrum, really. We have transition whenever we come to a crossroads and we make decisions to go in one direction or another. And it's one of those things where we have to face what we really want, what we need in our life, and we have to take a look at the vision that we have and where we're going to go forward. And I truly believe that when people die, when they transition, they go into a space or the other side. My grandmother died this summer that I shared with you guys. And she, I held her hand as she crossed, and it was a very powerful experience for me. And I can certainly attest to her presence in my life since she has passed in unexplainable ways and brilliant and beautiful moments that happen. And I really believe that somebody like Nelson Mandela will provide that for humanity on a large level because he is an archetype. And so for most people, he represents a symbolic archetype, a man who was able to affect the world, who was able to stand up and be who he is in all of his truth. Some people have all kinds of theories about who he is, what he was involved in, good, bad, and ugly, but who cares? Because quite frankly, it's all about what you do in the end, and it's all about how you live your life moment to moment. And there are certainly times when you don't see those moments when people take those choices at those crossroads. And it's done privately, and it's not done for the whole world to watch and see and be a voyeur. And so we have to really understand that people in general, the larger picture of people, is not always what we see. So we have these opportunities of windows where we can peer into people's lives, their souls, their energy, their moments when we are allowed to, when we're given permission to. And we can make discerning decisions from that point forward in what we choose to see. So I'm choosing to see Nelson Mandela's death as a beautiful addition to the archetypal constellations that rule our worlds, both inner and outer, upper and lower. And that's how I'm going to continue to see it. So when we get William on, we'll have him talk a little bit about what he sees in this entire thing and how he wants to, share with us what he thinks about it. And I'm sure his viewpoint on it will be positive because it usually is. And we're also going to be talking tonight about an interesting experience that I had. Recently, I was at Yale University on November 19th to view the Voynich Manuscript, which is one of my passions at the moment and something I'm really focusing on a lot. So he's going to be talking to me and to all of us about this manuscript that he had the opportunity to see as well in 2009. And I'm excited to hear that because I've just recently written an article for a magazine in France that will be published in February about my experience going to Yale, about what my insights and impressions were. And I purposefully kept myself contained in a space that absolutely did not allow for other people's theories to really drip-drop into my brain. And I wanted to experience this manuscript from the unpolluted mind of a child. And so I really did work very hard at just, studying the facts and just trying to really see what the facts were about the book. But I wanted to meet the book without any preconceived ideas about what it is. So tonight will be the first talk that I'm really having with anybody who has researched and talked about this publicly. So I'm interested to get William's insight on it because I'm going to start exploring other people's theories to see what synchronistic treasures hold in those conversations and how that was going to work with, piecing together the puzzles that I've been able to pull out of the piece as well. You can go to my blog, The Yin Factor, Y-I-N, And you can read my experiences, my adventures, my dreams. This manuscript is changing a lot of things about me personally and the way that I interact in the world around me and also with other people. And it's all because of the synchronistic kind of twine that happens between anything that you can have a relationship with. So it's been pretty fascinating for me. So I'd like to welcome William back to the show. You can go to his website, williamhenry.net, if you'd like to find more about him, what he's doing, all the great things he's involved in. But I'm excited to get him on because we're running a little late with getting him on, and we've got a lot of material to cover. So welcome, William. Thanks for being here.
My pleasure, Hillary, and thank you for your patience. It's great to talk with you.
Well, I'm sure you're busy. You have a lot of wonderful things going on. So we just found out that Nelson Mandela has passed away, and I promised everybody in the introduction as I was talking that you would, impromptu kind of give us your thoughts on what his passing symbolizes for the world today and what you think about that. And we're also going to be talking about the Voynich Manuscript, which you have had the opportunity to see. And so we have a lot of material to cover tonight. So where would you like to start?
Gosh, well, I'm so saddened to hear about the passing of Nelson Mandela. That's really something. I mean, he, of course, is one of the great lights of the 20th and early 21st century. I mean, we all like to think that we are all carrying a torch of the light and our lives stand for human freedom, but it's only when that freedom is taken away, as happened to Mr. Mandela, that we really are tested. And gosh, who would be prepared to give up all they've got right now and go sit in prison for almost, 4 decades and give up that much of your life and then emerge as he did with an exemplar of a higher consciousness. I mean, you talk about a trial by fire, and certainly we're going to miss his energy, miss his smile as much as anything, and just the brightness of his being.
I just recently read something about when a great oak dies, or any tree passes on into the other world, it actually begins to release all of its nutrients and all of its vitality into the soil, and then through the root system goes out to all the other trees around it. So that when it actually falls, it has passed its power on into those around it, and it continues on in that way. Do you feel that Nelson Mandela is like a great oak, and he's fallen and given us that same kind of infusion?
Absolutely. I mean, as you were saying that, I can just feel that kind of a tingling sensation all over my body. I mean, that absolutely resonates.
So what are you up to these days, William? I mean, where do we find you kind of hopping around? I know you have some trips coming up. You're going to Egypt. You're going to France again. What has really caught your muse today at this very moment in the now? What are you working on?
I am in the process of finishing a book about the Watchers, which kind of took me by surprise here this year. I'm actually kind of like got several balls up in the air right now. I'm working on a book on the Path of Souls, which is about navigating the afterlife, the geography of the afterlife. And then all of a sudden that just kind of took a turn into this book on the Watchers. And so I'm in the process of finishing that. It'll be available in January of 2014. Did 2 tours of France this year, which were absolutely amazing. We're going to be going back to France in 2014, in May of 2014. But before that, we're going back to Egypt in March of 2014, something I'm very excited about.
And if people want more information about joining your tours, where should they go?
They go to williamhenry.net.
That's wonderful. In fact, it's interesting that you're going to Egypt. Now, when's the last time you were there? Was it last year? You do a yearly trip, correct? Or has it been a few years?
Yeah, I've been going every year. The last time I was there was February 2012. So it's been a while, and just started to get the call, back, spring of this year, where just all of a sudden I'd walk out my front door and it smelled like Egypt outside. And it's like, okay, that's ISIS calling again. And so time to answer.
Yeah, well, I can only imagine now. How many years have you been going yearly? It's been quite a while.
10 years. Been going
10 years.
Annually for 10 years now.
And how do you feel that experience of going every year, because most people, get to go once in their lifetime, or maybe if they're lucky a few times, but you've been able to go as many times as you've gone, and how do you feel that really changes you personally, and Claire too now, because Claire's joining you on these trips as well, right?
Yes, she is. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how does it work for you? I mean, personally, I just want to open you up a little bit and just get you talking, because I'm curious, because I know you do so much work out in the world and you are really doing wonderful things in the books that are coming out. In fact, the last two that I read of yours were wonderful. And, you know, to maintain that kind of frequency level, that charge, it takes a lot of energy, a lot of power, a lot of personal focus. And so I'm curious if you feel that Egypt has been an integral part of that.
Absolutely. I mean, Egypt is kind of, it's first of all, it's a privilege to be able to go there and to experience the temples as we experience them. I mean, gosh, I was doing some research on the Temple of Isis at Philae last week, and I was just almost shocked when I realized that until 1976, that temple was underwater, and it was virtually inaccessible, and then it was moved into its present location. So for us to be able to go to this temple and wander around it is just an awesome privilege. And to be able to go there, Egypt is it can be a tough place to visit for some people, because as they say, Egypt brings up issues, and so it can, for some people, it's like sticking a pencil into a pencil sharpener. And at first, it can be a bit of a rough experience, but then after a while, pretty soon, you start working with it. You start attuning to the energies and getting closer to the real intent of the place, and now all of a sudden it just opens up in a whole new way for you. And that's kind of where I feel Claire and I are at, is that as we're going there, we've been going enough to where now we have enough brain power left within us to be able to kind of start to access what's there and answer the call in a much deeper way.
I like how you put that beyond the issues, because isn't that pretty relative to everybody's path when it comes to enlightenment or moving forward into a state of love, is that you really have to move past the issues so that you have the brain space and the mind space to really allow everything to come in that's trying to come in. One of the things I really loved when I went to Egypt, I've been there a few times myself, was the lotus blossoms that were all over the temple walls, and how, they were really depicted quite throughout the entire kingdom. And so, we know that the blue lotus was a plant that was, used to be in there. It's been brought back. Some people have brought it back to the Luxor area and are growing it and producing the oil. And it's something that is pretty rare in the world, the real stuff. And, speaking of the Voynich Manuscript, which is one of the reasons you and I connected, I asked you to come on. Yeah. I thought you'd be interested. In fact, I didn't even know that you had seen it when you remarked on my Facebook page after I posted a picture of me at Yale. You had said that you had seen it in 2009, and that perked my ears, because I hadn't even known that you had talked about it, and forgive me for not knowing that. But I was excited to talk to you because I was working on an article. And I had decided not to explore other people's theories until after I was finished with the article, and the article's been submitted and it's over. But now what I'm interested in is just kind of exploring what other people have experienced. Now, I know you've seen the book in person, so that was a really special experience, and it was something that was really exciting, and it was really a happy experience. And I feel that just making physical contact with the book, too, also kind of starts like an energy or some kind of thread of connection that just starts to show up and pop up if you allow that space to continue to be nurtured. So you're my first in talking about this after I've completed that, and I'm excited to see what your experience was, to hear about it, and to see what kind of synchronicity can happen in the conversation, because that's exactly what's happened since I've been exploring this manuscript. Is the level of synchronicity has increased 1,000-fold in my life, and it's leading to things that absolutely you just can't make it up. So how did you find it? How did you get to it? Where were you at in your journey when you decided to make the trip to go meet it?
Well, yeah, and thank you again for having me on to talk about it, Hillary. I was really excited to see that you were going to have that experience too. And it came up for me, and back in 2009, I was doing quite a bit of work up in Connecticut. There was a woman, Gloria Amendola, who was running a Magdalene group up there, and she was sponsoring events in the Milford and the New Haven area. In fact, she had one of these events with myself, Tim Wallace Murphy, and I believe Ani Williams was there, and a couple other individuals were speaking. It was right on the Yale campus. And so she had made arrangements for us to go see Voynich Manuscript. I had just a peripheral interest in it because one of the theories, which I'm sure we'll get a chance to talk about, is that the Voynich is a Cathar, a surviving Cathar document. It's thought to have been the only surviving primary document of the Cathar tradition, of the Cathar, the Great Heresy, as the opponents of it called it, but it's actually the original religion, perhaps, of Christianity that has roots ultimately in the temples of Isis and Osiris. So I was very intrigued by the manuscript, just having heard of it, and never dreamed really that I'd have an opportunity to come face to face with it. And so Gloria set the appointment up for us, and we made our journey over there to the Beneke manuscript library, went down the stairs there, put on the white gloves, and then all of a sudden, here comes this relatively small book. I mean, my first impression was, gosh, it really is like a folio of pages. It's not what we think of as a book. And the lambskin was just, or the vellum cover was just really kind of extraordinary to me. It was my first contact with a book like that. And I instantly got as I recall, a John Dee hit off of it. I know that one of the other theories is that John Dee at one time possessed the Voynich manuscript, and he, of course, was heavily involved with the occult movements of the reign of Elizabeth I. And the thought is that maybe that the Voynich was the work of another Englishman, Roger Bacon, a 13th century scientist, an astronomer, alchemist, and that somehow John Dee had acquired it from him and then passed on down the line. But it was interesting to me, Hillary, because getting back to Egypt, I had a heart chakra awakening just a few years before that, and so I was still very much in that kind of place where when I'd come into contact with an item, especially a granite statue or any kind of Egyptian artifact, it would spontaneously just open up my heart chakra. It's just something that would happen. I'd be walking through a museum, or I'd be in a temple or wherever, and all of a sudden, whoop, here goes the heart chakra opening right up. And it was curious to me that the Voynich manuscript hit me more in the high heart, as it's described, in between the heart and the throat. And I didn't quite understand then what that meant, nor do I really have a strong opinion what it means now, but I did definitely get an energetic hit from the manuscript.
Now, did you feel that physically? You're talking about a physical sensation when you walked through there and felt it in the high. So did you feel it like as a heat sensation, like a spreading out sensation? Did it travel?
Yes. No, it didn't spread out that much. It was kind of more of a pinpoint kind of a thing when where it hit me. And in fact, I had a similar type of experience today when I went to the Beneke website just to have a look at the manuscript again. And so I just was very intrigued anytime I have that kind of an energetic connection with a book or a statue or anything else.
It's quite something, and if we're awake enough, we'll notice these sensations that these objects are power objects. I really believe it. And the book itself is amazing. You described it very well. In fact, when I touched it and was running my hands over the cover, I was just intrigued by the material and the fact that there's nothing on the cover. It's just a plain covered kind of book, but the pages felt to me it was just amazing how you could just really tap into the energy. Anybody who's sensitive to that can certainly find something in that book. You had mentioned to me that you had a D vision, a John Dee vision when you were looking at that, and you touched on it briefly. Could you go into that a little bit more? Could you talk about that as far as, when you were sitting in front of the book and you actually had this experience? What could you just describe that a little bit more?
Yeah, it was just a sense of just a connection with Dee, and that knowing that he was one of the possessors of this book, and the thought that he's considered one of the greatest magicians of all time, and to think of just the possibility that he infused that book with his own personal energy. Or perhaps some other cosmic energies that he placed in the book is is just astounding to me. I can't recall exactly seeing anything like that. I just knew it was a connection with John Dee. I can't say that I had this guy with this older Englishman with this long beard, white beard, or anything like that. But it was
no
definitely.
Specifics. That's okay. No, because I'm always curious, because you're very in touch with your intuitive side. I've always respected you with that, and so. That's a feminine quality. It's how a man can actually work in the world, balanced in his feminine power, is being intuitive and insightful in that sense, and understanding that the visions happen and how to translate them and move into that direction. When you touch an object, you can pick up impressions from that object. It's something that, psychics and seers and clairvoyants and all kinds of different, whatever you want to call them, have been doing it for forever. And
sure.
This book certainly tops the most of my experiences with, second to maybe standing next to the Egyptian pyramids and touching the stones. But Edward Kelly was somebody that I connected with deeply when I was touching the book, when I was going through the book. I had a vision of him, and he was John Dee's kind of magical, muse, if you will. He was his seer. And he was a self-declared spirit medium, and he worked in a lot of magical investigations, and he was an ambiguous figure in the English Renaissance, and he was an occult kind of master, I guess, and he used crystals and so on and so forth. But he was also claimed to possess the secret of transmuting base metals into gold. And so, since coming back from Yale, I've been looking into a lot of his work and who he is, and he was very connected to the Archangel Uriel. And I'm curious if that Archangel Uriel has had any influence in your life.
No, I haven't had any direct experiences with Uriel, but Uriel is thought to be one of those watcher angels that has all the wisdom of the universe and is there waiting to offer it to us, isn't Uriel?
Has he popped up in your Watchers book?
Yeah, he's named as one of the 7 main watchers.
That's interesting, because
along with
I think
Gabriel,
that's interesting.
Michael.
Yeah. Well, and Uriel doesn't have a symbol necessarily that's related to him, a sigil. So it's Michael has one, they all have one, and he doesn't have one. It's a very elusive symbol. I've been working with some people to help me track down that some kind of symbol in history to see where we can find that. But I haven't been able to find it so far. So it'll be interesting to see if it pops up in your work, because of that connection with the manuscript. I really believe that energy is very much associated with it. And so that watcher energy that comes through Uriel came through Edward Kelly, through John Dee, and, through everybody else who lays hands on that book. So, synchronistically, these are the kind of things that happen, that have happened, that have increased since I saw the book. That these moments of conversation that, are just conversation, really. It's just that simple, and then things will pop up and, kind of light up and go on from there. And then, each person takes away from the conversation whatever they take away from the conversation. Did you feel that synchronicity was something that was enhanced after you experienced this book?
I can't say that for sure. I did want to make another point, though, about Edward Kelly and the Watchers, and that is that it's something to just kind of think about, is that he was supposed to have known the angelic language, which is also called Enochian, after Enoch. And it was, of course, Enoch is the hero, the earthly hero of the Watchers. And Uriel would have initiated Enoch in the knowledge that he possessed and is said to have shared with mankind in the pre-flood era. And then the Essenes, of course, picked up on the Enochian story as well. And so, there's just no telling if we really are dealing with the manuscript that was attributed to John Dee and possibly Edward Kelly, and that in undeciphered and indecipherable language that the Voynich Manuscript is written on, if that ends up actually being Enochian, then we've got a whole nother kind of kettle of fish on our hands here, so to speak, and this book becomes more than just kind of an herbal manuscript, as so many just describe it as, and it becomes instead possibly a book itself that could be angelic in its origin.
Well, I have to agree with that. You know, it's something that's crossed my mind as I've been, you know, toying through the whole experience of this, and other people too, you know, have wanted to come forward and talk about their theories and stuff, and I've kind of held them off a little bit until I'm at a place where I want to start hearing them. So it's fascinating to me, and I feel like we're having a phone conversation more than a radio show, but that's the way I want it, because to be honest with you, this is not something that I think has to be, you know, can really be intellectualized. It's not something you can approach, you know, as just another object of study. It's an intuitive, a very feminine thing. Yes, there's plant medicine in it. There's also plant recipes, compound recipes. There's all kinds of different things that I feel are in the book. But what really is there is, is for me anyway, what I've kind of pieced together for myself with my own experience is that there's a language there. There is a language between human beings and the plant kingdom that is extremely real and talked about and explained and gone into in whatever language it's written in. And, you know, it shows us this kind of all-invasive type etheric kind of space that we communicate with each other through, not just the voice or not just the emotions and not just intellectually, and not even just with the body, but, you know, in all multidimensional forms. So the language, the communication is what I keep picking up on as relevant and important in this piece, but not just a simple, okay, plants talk to you and tell you, because that's shamanic. I mean, there's a lot of shamanic teachings that tell you about the teachings of the plants and how the plants will tell you, you know, how to use them, what to use them for. And that's very relevant, but I believe they also take you through portals, and that's why we see so many women in the book going through the tunnels, going through the plant stems, going into these pools of green liquid. Right. And I'm curious what you think about that, because for me, when I've been really knee-deep in this for the past few months, when I look at these, I'm looking at women going into a state of being that produces an avenue of travel, you know, some kind of out-of-body experience perhaps, but consciousness. I mean, there's so many different diagrams in this book. There's about 240 pages. There are some missing. And, you know, we have these women, and then there's a few men in the manuscript, but they're mostly depicted in kind of like a ritualistic chart. You know, the men kind of come in and they're catalysts, I believe, to the whole thing, because it's mostly women. It's 95% women depicted in the manuscript. And all different, ages of women, all different body forms of women. Some are pregnant, some are in different obvious cycles. And they're all involved in this. And so I'm curious how the Stargate phenomenon, you know, works in this for you, if you've pondered that, because I know the Stargate concept, a lot of people take kind of like as a theory, but the practicality of what it means to have a Stargate, you know, to really real life open up these places where we can communicate with other realms is a very physical thing, I believe. It really there's a physical magic that's involved. So I'm curious how you feel about the whole Stargate thing when you were looking through the manuscript, and what kind of piqued your interest with that.
Yeah, well, I'm with you. I mean, there are some of these illustrations that are just seem to be blatant representations of people going through Stargates or wormholes. And that is something I investigated with the Cathar connection as well, because the Cathars had a deep understanding of transformation and transfiguration into beings of light preparatory to going through these gateways or the halls or holes in space. And if in fact if the Voynich does have a Cathar connection, then it would suggest that this is exactly what we're seeing here, is this transformative transmutational process. And it's mind-blowing to think of it in those terms, but then again, if the Cathars are responsible, this would have been the basis of their teaching, and this is what they would have sought to communicate to the world. And those who do look at the Voynich manuscript from the Cathar perspective, as you have done, have noted the predominance of the women in the pages here. It's clearly is a work of the divine feminine. It's a work probably by women, about women, and perhaps even ultimately for women.
For those of you who are listening, who may be a little lost in this conversation, not really knowing what we're talking about, the Voynich Manuscript is a book that's housed in the Yale Rare Manuscript Book Library. It's a codex handwritten in an unknown writing system. The book has been carbon dated to the early 15th century and may have been composed in northern Italy during the Italian Renaissance. It's proposed. It's named after Wilfrid Voynich, who was a book dealer who purchased it in 1912. So you can go online. I have some links up here on Achieve Radio's website that you can click on. You can explore it. I also have some pictures and some important links on my blog as well, my website. So you're welcome to find out more there. William also, I'd like to just let people know, williamhenry.net, if you'd like to find out more about his trips coming up, and anything else that you do. You do sessions too, William, right? You actually do phone sessions for people, like readings?
I do. Yeah, I do. I love doing that. Thank you.
So if you're interested in having one of those, please contact him directly through his website. Okay, so back to the manuscript here and the Cathar connection. Now, this book was found in a castle in France, and it was found in a chest of other books, and Wilfrid Voynich was going through those, I guess, and he didn't disclose which castle that he found it in, but there is a castle image in the Voynich manuscript, which I find very fascinating, and I'm sure you got to see that as well. And I'm dying to know, if this was an actual location. There is an image underneath the castle that looks kind of like a vortex, and then it goes into a very elaborate type of drawing of almost like another world underneath it and stuff. Have you seen that? Did you notice that in there?
No, I'm trying to recall exactly the diagram you're referring to. I know that if it's the same one, it depicts the round tower that's very much like the towers that we see at Carcassonne in near the Languedoc in southern France.
Yeah, I'll send you that image. I'll send it to you on Facebook because you need to see it, and maybe just seeing it again will jar something. There was an image of three towers. Kind of like clouds parting and seeing three towers, like the top of a castle. But I took a picture of another image of an actual full castle with like a swirling type thing drawing underneath the castle that was actually in the earth. And then underneath that was a diagram. I'll send that to you so you can take a look at that. I'm interested in your feedback on that because what I feel it is possibly some kind of Cathar castle connection that may have shown some kind of entrance into another, wherever, realm, world type thing, who knows. But that's something that I've noticed. There was dragons. There was a dragon image in there. Some animal species that, haven't been identified. And the majority of plants, some people have really looked at this and really tried to decide, what the plants are, where they come from. And some of them are completely unidentifiable. When you looked at the plants, what did you get intuitively from them as far as an impression, if anything?
Well, for me, it's almost as if the book is written from the outside in. It's written by someone from another world that is showing us plants maybe even from another world. Some think that the plants actually exist in only one place, that's South America, and suggest that there might be a South American connection with the book. But then there's this whole idea of inversion, and what tipped me off to that, there was a guy, and this was something I had come across in my Cathar research back when I was doing that, as I mentioned, back in 08, 09 or whenever, a guy named Big Jim Finn or something like that, online. He did some of the early research on the Voynich manuscript, and he had shown how in addition to having the herbal sections, there's also astronomical sections in the book or in the codex. And one of these astronomical drawings appears to show the Milky Way galaxy, or a mirror image of the Milky Way galaxy, so that the Milky Way is shown as if you were looking from the outside in, as if whoever had original knowledge of this book that was transmitted in the book came from the Milky Way itself. And I began to think, well, what if it's possible that we are looking at a manuscript that's chronicling plants that belong in some other world, and that is the ultimate message of this book, and it is actually a guidebook for what someone experiences or recalls or is wanting us to know about this otherworldly realm, perhaps even a paradisical realm, because of the emphasis on the plants. It's clear that they're describing some kind of a garden somewhere. Is it an earthly garden, or is it a garden in some other realm?
You know, I had the same exact impression when I was handling the book and writing about it after, so that's very interesting that you make that statement. So my thought was the Garden of Eden, you know, really the garden of the beginning, the garden of, the star charts in there are fascinating because it is exactly what it is. It's a perspective from the outside in. So if you're on the outside looking at it and drawing it, and, you know, science is just now really catching up to that and being able to kind of tell us, you know, what these things look like. And, you know, some of them are also extremely similar to cross sections of plant stems or cells. You know, the images go into microscopic details as well. So it goes from the microscopic to the macroscopic. And, you know, we very well could be dealing with some kind of outside knowledge. And what I've picked up on the book was that this was a book that had been scribed over time. You know, it may not even be the original first book, but it was definitely recreated. And this is not, you know, that's how knowledge was passed down. It was passed down orally in some cultures, and then it was written down by scribes in other cultures. So this could be just a reproduction of some other reproduction of some other reproduction, and so on and so forth, that goes back even older, back to even when the indigenous talk about the star people coming and sharing plant knowledge with them. And, you know, they're starting to come out and talk about that too. And it's one of those things where you just can't make it up. You know, it's like everybody comes from a different perspective with it. But ultimately, what we're dealing with is something that is very old, and I feel it's old knowledge. It comes from someplace. And these plants could even be extinct. You know, these plants could have been power plants that were used, and now in 2013 don't exist as far as we know it. I mean, how many cycles has the plant realm really gone through in evolution? So, I mean, but some of them were very abstract, as you noticed, I'm sure. And the symbols, they even had figures of humans in the plants. Faces coming out of them, kind of moving through the different parts of them. And so it was sometimes very abstract. Half the plant would be one-sided kind of looking plant, and the other plant would be another side. But there was also a very clear cannabis plant in there. Very clear. And it's a female cannabis plant. So did you see that when you were looking through it? Did you notice that connection?
No, I didn't. That's a great pickup, Hillary. Way to go.
So it's, you know, so we have that around still, and people are now finding out the medicinal properties of the cancer and being able to, you know, the healing properties of that plant too. So anyhow, I just felt that was really important, and it was also really interesting. And what did you think about the ritualistic type charts of the people and circles and with all the stars around them? And did you feel that was part of the harvesting of, the awakening of the plant, or did that not? What did you get from that?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting aspect of it, too. I mean, I'm looking at one of them where it's almost celebratory is the feeling that I get as I look at some of these images. It's very, very playful, but and they're clearly not trying to be what we would think of as scientific, although it's very scientific what they're describing.
So you feel that it's kind of a description of the scientific sort of feel to how these plants would be worked with, basically, right?
Yeah, how they're worked with, and ultimately what they can do. And it also has this inference too that they're trying to connect us with the plants, as if humanity is just another state of vegetative life almost.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, I don't know. It's definitely changed my life in a lot of really wonderful ways. And the people that I've met since have been extraordinary and just magical. So, you know, it's the Cathar connection, I think, is really important too, because it's about the heart and the book of love, and how love is a form of communication between people and plants and basically every other living organism on the planet. You know, everybody knows when somebody is coming at it from a stance experience of love. It's something we feel by a lot, in our physical bodies. So, to live the book of love alive would be this kind of understanding between two physical elements, don't you think?
Absolutely, and you can't help but try to make a connection to the book of love when you're looking at a potential remnant of the Cathar teaching. And it strikes me as certainly a good possibility. I mean, one of the perspectives on the book of love is that it was written in symbols, that it also takes us back to the temples of Isis, and this is something that it seems as if the Voynich is trying to do as well.
Take us back to Egypt. Well, that brings us back to the blue lotus too. This was the divine flower, and it was consumed. It was a hallucinogenic. It had different properties for visioning. Have you had any experience directly with that plant?
I have, just in the sense of we're always trying to track down whatever we can find of the original blue lotus oil, if such a thing still exists today. I mean, there's lots of people that say they've got old stock of blue lotus oil, and then of course you've got the stuff that is obviously not the right thing. And I've always been interested in Tutankhamun's throne chair, which heavily features the blue lotus, and he is portrayed on the back of the chair being anointed by his wife. He's now being transformed from a man into a divine man vis-a-vis the blue lotus. And relative to the Voynich too, I've always kind of in the back of my mind wondered if in fact the blue lotus could be like a tuner of cosmic energy, maybe even coming from the heart of the Milky Way, and that ultimately that's one way that we're able to tap into this divine light at the galactic center is through the blue lotus. So it's clear that the ancient Egyptians, they had the secrets, the very same secrets that whoever it is that wrote the Voynich Manuscript must have also possessed that same knowledge.
Do you feel that this was a secret society, kind of mystery school type knowledge back, they say this goes back to the 15th century. Wouldn't we be kind of in that period where this knowledge would be underground at that point?
Well, it would be emerging. I mean, you're talking about the Renaissance, and so you're talking about a time when there was huge interest in recovering these secrets. The Corpus Hermeticum had just been translated. The works of Plato were regaining currency. There was a lot of emphasis on transformation and even ascension, and so it seems that the Voynich Manuscript coming out of this era would have to be classified among these documents that are ultimately encoding the secrets of alchemy and human transformation. And that's what you see all through the book is this idea of transformation, of going through portals and gateways, and of organic growth.
Interesting. We have a question from Roger in Nebraska. He writes in, says, interesting, a universal communication. Isn't that odd? Oh, just lost that. When you square it with the Tower of Babel, perhaps some connection here. He's curious. Well, I guess what he's asking is if there's a connection with the Tower of Babel in your mind. I didn't find that when I was looking at it, but. Yeah,
I mean, the only connection would be the Tower of Babel ultimately represents the human quest for ascension and immortality, and ultimately transformation into a divine being. So, I mean, if what we're proposing here is the true message of the Voynich Manuscript, and that it is some kind of an alchemical document that contains the secret of transmutation, then philosophically it would certainly be along the same lines of the Tower of Babel.
He also asks, are castles or towers representative of vortexes? And Roger, if you'd like to call in and talk to us, you're more than welcome to, but he's sending some good questions in quick, which other people are welcome to do too. So he wants to know if castles or towers are representative of vortexes in your work, Henry. What?
Well, they are. I mean, when we think of the Tower of Babel, the word Babel originally meant the ladder, tower, or stairway to heaven. It was clearly a gateway. It was, in fact, humankind's first attempt to regroup and reopen the gate that had been closed to us during the Garden of Eden episode, when Adam and Eve were evicted from the garden, and when we were given our coats of human skin. Prior to that, we were in our light bodies, according to Jewish mysticism. So there's always, whenever you're seeing these towers or stories of the tower, there's almost always a story of human transformation or ascension. So you had it with the Tower of Babel, then that's destroyed around 650 BC, somewhere in that area. Then the Essenes come along in the 3rd century BC. All of a sudden, there's lots of stories coming out now where we're starting to see that the forbidden boundary that we weren't allowed to cross, is suddenly permeable, and there's all kinds of humans that are going through this ascension process. So there was, at that time, is when the Jewish people regrouped and rebuilt their tower in Jerusalem. They not only rebuilt the tower in Jerusalem, they also built the tower in Leontopolis in Egypt. So in both instances, we find the story of a tower, and we also find stories of human transformation. And in this instance, the connection with our conversation this evening is that the primary hero of these transformation stories was Enoch, who was always connected with a tower as well. He was taken up into a high tower and shown the secrets of the universe. So again, if Edward Kelly is making this connection here to the Voynich Manuscript by being an expert or knowledgeable of the Enochian language, the language of the angels, then we have a really interesting correspondence there, in my view.
Yeah, we do. I really can see that. That's a really interesting connection. Roger wrote in again. He said, no, in the Bible, the Tower of Babel screwed up the universal language is what I meant. So I guess he was talking about the breaking up of the unifying language into multiple languages to confuse humanity, which would bring another interesting concept into this discussion, because if what Edward Kelly was, using the Enochian language, if that was the unifying language of humanity and people were all talking the same language and saying the same things, there was no confusion. Before we broke that up, then once we broke the languages up into all the different languages and kind of scattered things to the four corners of the world, wouldn't that have definitely shut something down that humanity is basically entitled to?
Yeah, absolutely. And when you think about the historical context of the Voynich Manuscript as well, we're talking about the period around 1610 AD is the time when John Dee was said to have possessed the manuscript. Actually, he was just a little bit before that, and during the court of Queen Elizabeth I, and then immediately following John Dee comes Sir Francis Bacon. And it's Bacon who then unifies the world by creating this new code language called English, in which he translates the King James Version of the Bible into English. He had to actually create as many as 6,000 new English words in order to make that translation. If he doesn't do that, we're speaking French or Latin or something, but not English. And English then doesn't become the universal language, which is what it is today. It's the language of science. It's the global language. It's the great unifier. So it's interesting to me that the Voynich Manuscript touches on that history in the sense that it was present during this court of Queen Elizabeth I, when suddenly this major shift in human consciousness began, the introduction of English as the unifying language.
So when we have the unifying language, when we're all able to talk on the same page and communicate concepts and ideas and have these synchronistic moments because we're all speaking the same language, doesn't that in fact validate the fact that, in order to unify the world, in order to bring everybody together, to do this massive, transitional transformation of the world from what it is to where we're going, would include the rediscovering or, even just a universal language where we can all say the same thing and mean the same thing and have words that describe our experiences so we can best get those across to people without having misunderstandings, yes?
Absolutely. And in fact, the English is referred to as the green language or the language of the gods. It's also called the language of the birds. And it's claimed that this was the language spoken by Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. I mean, that sounds absolutely ridiculous to some, But this was a belief that was shared by the great alchemists. Even Falconelli, the great alchemical master of the early 20th century, said that English was the language of Adam and Eve. And it's wild to think in those terms. But again, there's been some very great thinkers for the past several hundred years who have proclaimed exactly that thought.
Well, I think it's fascinating, and I'm just, making notes here as we're talking. And thank you, Roger, from Nebraska, for writing in. I think those were great questions, and it added to the conversation and the epiphanies and the things that are coming through in it. So I appreciate that. We have the Garden of Eden, we have the plants of the Garden of Eden, perhaps, and in the book there are also recipes, which are knowledge, and of the alchemy of the combinations of those things. So wouldn't it be, Adam and Eve, Eve goes in and ruins it all by biting the apple, and everybody gets pissed off, and all their feathers get ruffled, and they get kicked out of the garden. So couldn't it be possible that this could be a symbolism or a symbolic representation of this kind of knowledge that allows people to go into these spaces productively in a love state that, chemically changes the world, because we do have a connection between the plant realm chemically. They respond to us, they respond to our sounds, they respond to our thoughts, they respond to our emotions. Science is coming up with all kinds of relevant studies to show that different things happen through the human body. The human body has an actual root system. And so this communication with fungi, these mushrooms in the root systems of trees and other plants actually communicate from plant to plant. And so as something comes up, if they're being, invaded by something that's a disease, it'll send out a message through the roots into the other roots of other trees and so on and so up, out through the garden. And it will change chemically. So there's a level of communication happening. The universal communication seems to be that kind of connective field that we're a part of. We're not separated from that. So the return of the Garden of Eden, wouldn't that be the return of the knowledge, of understanding that Adam and Eve actually have an influence, and that they can open up these alchemical marriage type spaces and then affect the rest of the world?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that, Hillary. And then you layer on top of that what we were saying earlier about our understanding that, hey, the Voynich Manuscript has an actual accurate map of our Milky Way galaxy, and it suggests to me that we are now stepping into that same kind of awareness that or consciousness that is present in the Voynich Manuscript, which means, or what I mean by that is that it's a Milky Way based metaphysics, and the idea that would be that if they know that we dwell inside this Milky Way galaxy in our great cosmic mothership, then whoever created this must also have known of the vaster garden of galaxies that make up the known universe, the hundreds of billions of galaxies that now the Hubble Space Telescope has shown to us. So to me, it's all about plugging into not only the microcosm represented by the plants, but also the macrocosm, all these great blue lotuses that are flying around out there in the cosmos, and we call them galaxies.
Love it. Well, we're actually out of time, and I wanted to thank you for taking the time to be here with me and all my listeners, and I hope everybody's enjoyed the conversation. I certainly have, and William, thank you very much for being conversational about it and being open to having this discussion tonight.
My absolute pleasure. It's been an honor, Hillary, and I want to wish you all the best for the remainder of 2013 and a happy 2014.
Thank you. You well. Please give Claire my best. Thanks, everyone. We're out of time. Until next week, namaste.